The Grandest Bookshop in the World. Part 2. Author Amelia Miller. Eddie wasn't even looking at it. His eyes were only on Maylin in her tight gold capow. Eddie had changed a lot recently. He was the same height now as their big sister. The boyish roundness had left his face, giving definition to an angular jaw, which he was now shaving every second day. Valley didn't think he'd ever have Eddie's confident good looks. He had his father's oval face, the kind that managed to look childlike, even with a luxuriant beard. Well, anyway, I was getting to the good bit, said Valley, trying to salvage the conversation they'd just been having. The master calls the marks and we get our tests back. And as we're leaving, Henry Bramford goes, "Another A+ for Val Collin. Got to study hard to be like his crackpot dad." So I turn around and I go, "Don't worry, Henry, you can always work on the family farm." And he shoves me and says, "Because all farmers are stupid, are they?" And I go, "No, because you're a donkey." The kitchen saloon doors swung with Maylin passing. Eddie turned abruptly back to face his brother. "Sorry?" Valley sighed. At the time, it had seemed like the perfect comeback. Henry Bramford hadn't hurt Valley as much as he'd hoped to. Nobody who knew Pa could deny that he was bonkers a person would have to be to write anything as joyously silly as Cole's Fun Doctor or the Funny Picture Book. No sane man could have dreamed up anything as wondrous, as magical, as downright peculiar as Cole's Book Arcade. But it was all right to be a bit eccentric if everybody loved you for it. Now, though, the argument seemed stupid and childish. It was sort of only funny if you were there. Valley bit into a cream-covered scone. Eddie's eye was wandering again. Maylin was bent over the neighboring table gathering teacups. "Are you in love with Maylin, Ed?" Valley whispered. "Do you want to marry her?" To Valley's surprise, his brother shrugged. I have to learn Chinese." Valley didn't know how to respond. He'd expected Eddie to punch him on the shoulder or flick a crumb of scone at him. Maybe she could teach me Chinese and I could help with her English. Eddie slathered more jam on his scone. "Don't you think she's pretty?" Valley felt as if he was searching one of Pa's picture puzzles for a hidden image. Here is a traveler in forest. Find the bear. But Valley had never found that bear, and he couldn't see what Eddie could see now. Perhaps one day it would pop out of the image and he'd wonder how he ever missed it. "Come on," Eddie grinned. It reminded Valley of the warped reflections in the mirrors of Wonderland. The arcade's hall of illusions. You must be able to recognize a jammy bit of jam when you see her. He lifted his scone to his mouth. An actual jam doesn't count, by the way. A red-headed shop girl who worked across the street gave Valley a fluttery feeling in his stomach when he saw her. But the general idea of jamminess was foreign to him. The tea salon, with its fine china and sumptuous furnishings, suddenly seemed too grown up. Valley found himself wishing they were in the lolly shop instead, where they could watch the confectioner smack and slap the oozing hot sugar into humbugs and raspberry drops. They used to go there for afternoon tea. They'd laughed so hard when Valley had put 2 voice-changing caramels in his mouth at once and been stuck speaking in a thunderous bass all evening. Why had they stopped going? Miss Finch, his brother challenged him. Valley tried to recall the face of the sunny young woman who played the piano in the Book Arcade band. Pretty, I guess. Her over there? Eddie gestured at a dour-looking grandmother on the far side of the room. Pretty old, said Valley. But he regretted it. Quibbling with classmates was one thing. Judging people this way as if they were animals in a livestock show felt stupid and mean. Right then, Ed seemed smug as if he had proved a point. And how about Ma? The question felt like a trap. When Pa had put his good wife, wanted ad in the paper all those years ago, he had hoped to meet someone intelligent, funny, kind, and responsible, and he had. Eliza Cole was a bright sunbeam who made friends wherever she went. She was stately on special occasions. She was elegant, but there was nothing remarkable about her appearance. She was short and robust, reassuringly solid when you needed a hug, but not beautiful. At rest, her face looked stern. And because she and Pa were famous, people liked to gossip. On the tram, in the market, anywhere people could get hold of newspapers, they'd eventually come to the Book Arcade ads, and then they talked. Old Coles cooked up at some outrageous fib about a sea serpent. His marketing is creative. I'll grant him that. Did you know he advertised to find his wife? There's a lesson in that. Don't forget to ask for a pretty one. And Valley would have to stare at the street, pretending it didn't hurt to hear them talk about his mother like that. I don't know, Ed. Valley stood, shouldering his school satchel. See you at dinner. As he emerged into the arcade proper, Valley felt brittle. He knew he wasn't supposed to have favorite siblings, but he did. The 2 closest to him in age had been closest to his heart as well. Above him was Eddie, who was outdoors in sunny days, football and crude humor. They kept each other company on the tram. They talked across the darkness of their shared bedroom, although Eddie usually fell asleep first. They had once hidden a dead rat in the teacher's desk when they were caned for it. The pain and humiliation were halved by Eddie bearing it beside him. Below him was the sister, who was winter evenings in the warm flat, reading by rain-specked windows, indoor games, secrets, dreams, imaginings. The sister who had never made fun of him for liking games a girl liked, but let him join in. One day, she'd shown him how she could make a soft light, the size of a dandelion head, balanced on her fingertip. She'd coaxed it and praised it to life, her powerful imagination making up a little for the shakiness of a 7-year-old articulation. What she had tried to teach Valley, he'd struggled the most with conviction. After half a dozen tries, with Ruby encouragement, he got it, but then, as often happened with him, an intrusive worry had disrupted his imagination. The light had turned into a flame at the last moment, burning his finger and narrowing, missing the curtain. Ruby had told their parents he'd been careless with the candle, but she wasn't around anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. And now Eddie was on the train to adulthood, leaving Valley behind. He felt a little better when he breathed in the rich tropical smell of fernery. On the outside, the door was set in the middle of a bookshelf. On the inside, it was in the middle of a tree. Yellow butterflies rose in whirlwind as Valley stepped through. The fernery was one of the Book's arcade most marvelous rooms. From outside at the little Collins Street entrance, it looked like an ordinary greenhouse, but from the inside it was enormous, tall and wider than any greenhouse in the world. It had once been ordinary, full of shady ferns and the calls of the bird and the aviary. It had been on oasis, in its own right, a little spot of green in the middle of the city. On rainy days, when the sky was as dark as wet blue stone, Pa had often escaped his office and sat on a hidden bench, scribbling away at his letters and articles. One bitter Sunday in August, when the arcade was closed, he'd come down to the greenhouse, there, alone and secure, in the knowledge that he wouldn't be interrupted. He had ridden the fernery into its present vast existence. He had expanded the inner space, pushing the glass roof up to the height of the tallest church spire and the glass walls out to 5 acres. It would never have worked so well if not for Pa's strength in all 3 principles of magic. Being a writer gave him an advantage in articulation. Being a visionary made his imagination both broad and minutely detailed. And being an optimist made his conviction more powerful than that of anyone Valley knew. Negative thoughts didn't seem to touch Pa. Shoplifters and customer complaints didn't bother him. If he'd burned his finger conjuring floating lights, he would have simply brought a bucket of water next time. In the years since, Pa had stocked the fernery with plants and creatures suited to its climate. He had collected some of his own specimens and accepted others as gifts. Having failed to produce a miniature thundercloud, he had installed a system of handsome brass sprinklers. But magic didn't always do what it was supposed to. Spells and magical effects all decayed eventually, like anything people created, and the unstable nature of magic made it impossible to predict exactly how this might happen. Sometimes spells fell apart all at once, like a house of cards. Sometimes they wore away gracefully, like a castle, and sometimes like coral growing on a shipwreck, they gradually transformed into something stranger. This was probably the case with the fernery, because some of the trees had grown as much in 6 years as they ought to be 2 in 100. And now the fernery was its own world, hot and green and glorious, a whole rainforest inside Cole's Book Arcade. Perhaps Valley would have a dip in the pond. He would have to hide his clothes, though, to stop the monkeys playing with them. He scanned the treetops for the telltale rustling. Last time, they'd stolen his trousers, tossed his underclothes in the water, and bounded away hooting. They might have been the animals next to man, as Pa called them, but Valley preferred them to be the animals far away from Boy. Something rustled in the underground nearby. He froze. It sounded big. A bear, a jaguar, a Komodo dragon? Pa would never buy such beasts for the peaceful fernery. But although Valley trusted his father, he didn't trust magic. It was unpredictable, its laws and limits varying from one artist to the next. It turned every nice safer into a shifty. Maybe someone could have smuggled in a cat and transformed it for a laugh. The fernery might have spontaneously created some predator to control the monkey population. He gave it another moment. The ferns were still. Valley relaxed. It must have been a bird, then, shaking the fronds as it flew off. He could hear the parrot screeching, somewhere up ahead. He started towards them, passing where the leaves had stirred. Roar! Valley jumped behind him. His attacker fell into a fit of giggles. He whirled around. Pearl! She stood behind a tree, grinning like a pixie. Not a pretty one from a girl's reader, but the wicked kind that stole babies and turned milk sour. It isn't funny, said Valley, his pulse still hammering inside him. That's the oldest trick in the book. She pushed aside ferns. He was so scared. I was startled. There's a difference. He set his shoulders. If anyone were to leap out from hiding and surprise their siblings, which was a stupid joke anyway, it ought to have been him. According to 1,000 songs and pictures and stories, older brothers were bullies and heroes, while little sisters were subjects and victims. Perhaps that had been somewhat true of the Cole family once. It was true of Eddie. He used to come storming in like a giant while Valley and Ruby were playing Zoo Escape, kicking over the dolls and wooden animals, the tin soldiers and buildings. And it was true of Ivy, the baby. She was an innocent little thing, easily fooled and afraid of stuffed polar bears at the front door. But then, Pearl had always been bricky. She was a meddler and show-off, as curious and bold as the monkeys. She was the loudest of the Coles, the most liable to run off on family outings, the one who took the least notice of what was expected of her. She had a knack for finding the wettest, dirtiest corner of anywhere and coming home wearing its souvenirs. And the worst thing for Valley was that she'd always brought out the same wild side in Ruby. The Ruby who had played with Pearl was like a different child altogether. One who bounced on furniture and rifled through other people's things and drew too much attention on the tram and laughed in the faces of older siblings who lost their temper. It had come as no surprise to Valley when he'd read about pearls and their formation. When a bit of sand or a parasite got into an oyster, the mollusk would smother it in shell like layers before spitting it out. And thus, the book had said, a pearl is the result of constant irritation. Valley had held on to those words, their pleasant cadence, their cruel wit. You, he said, as Pearl extracted herself from the underground, are a constant irritation. And it's lovely to see you too, she said, striding past him into the jungle. Come on, Pa, thought you'd want to see our new cockatoo. It's pink. Gullah, said Valley, jumping over the low loop of a vine. You're a gullah, said Pearl. It's a cockatoo with a crest. The marvelous new bird was Major Mitchell Cockatoo, and as promised, it was pink. It stood on a platform in the feeding area, taking nuts from the hands of Valley's captivated father. Try it again, Echo, Pa said. I love Cole's funny picture book. Silly bird, the cockatoo said, flexing its red and yellow crest. Pearl narrowed her eyes. Is it really talking, Pa? You haven't done it with magic. No, it's trained. The bird bit him. Although how well trained is it up for a debate? Come say hello, Val. Pa straightened, gesturing to a paper bag on a nearby picnic seat. Watch your fingers, though. Valley took a handful of nuts. Hello, Cocky. The cockatoo gave an ear-splitting shriek. Mind your head. Be good, you cheeky thing, said Pa, stroking its crest. This is Valley, Val. This is Echo. Come on, birdies, the bird cried. Tuck in for your feed. Valley stretched out his hands, offering the treat. The bird bit him instead, with a cry. Valley dropped the whole handful, and the cockatoo hopped to the ground to gobble them up. Echo, don't bite! Pa made a frustrated noise. You're a naughty one. aren't you?" "He's a great talker, Pa," Valley said. The parrot bobbed its head. "Clever girl," echoed. "I do believe she understands every word we've said," said Pa, with a chuckle. "Although I hope she's not as cunning as our monkeys, or we'll be in trouble." "What do you think, Pearly Gig?" But Pearl wasn't listening. She had gone still and quiet, watching something flutter among the fronds high above. It moved like a wren, but its body seemed as slight as a butterfly's. "What is it?" Valley asked. "A paper wagtail." Pearl shaded her eyes against the greenish sunlight. "It's been scrutinizing me." "Scrutinizing," Valley said. Echo flied back to the chair. "Cheeky bird!" Valley watched the paper bird wave its tail. "Is it one of yours, Pa?" "No," said Pearl. "The other day this tall man came into the arcade looking for Pa. I thought he was a stage magician, so I asked him to show me a trick, and he made the paper bird fly out of his hat. But now I wish I hadn't. He was creepy, and he—" "Shh!" Pa threw a wary glance at the wagtail, as if it might be listening, put his hand on Pearl's shoulder, and dropped his voice to a whisper. "How long has it been watching you?" "Since it was here. Today's the 3rd day. Does it come into the flat?" Pearl looked a little startled. "No, but this morning when I walked out, it was waiting for me." "What's the matter?" Valley was beginning to feel left out and a little unnerved. "It's only paper, isn't it?" "Of course," said Pa in a loud wooden voice, as if he was acting in a bad play. "Come on, let's leave the parrots to their dinner. Why can't you ride it away?" Valley asked. "I can't try," muttered Pa, steering Pearl and Valley away from the clearing. "I tried to magic it away too," Pearl said. "I wanted it to disappear, but I only made its head invisible for a few hours." "A headless bird?" Valley winced. Horrors like that were the reason why I saw Cree out to be studied and practiced meticulously, the way Pa did it. Pearl should not have been allowed to play with magic any more than she was allowed to play with matches. Pa kept one hand on Pearl's and Valley's backs all the way to the fernery door. Now and then he peered over his shoulder. Valley did the same. He glimpsed the wagtail once, then again. The sense began to crawl up his body that the wagtail was somehow much stronger than it appeared. Right on the fernery doorstep, Pa tripped. Valley heard his knee clunk on the bluestone. He let out a dreadful moan. "Ugh." "Pa!" Pearl dropped to her knees. "Are you okay?" "Yes," said Pa through clenched teeth. "Go on, you do." He limped through the door behind his son and daughter. As it closed, Valley searched the green gap for a flash of black and white, but the wagtail was nowhere to be seen. "Well, now, leaning on a bookshelf, Pa ventured a smile. "I think we'll let the sprinkles take care of that." He was trying to pass it off as a game, trying to pretend neither of them had seen the panic in his eyes. Maybe Pearl was fooled, but Valley wasn't. His Pa was afraid, as afraid as he had been at their sister's deathbed, and there was more white at his temples than Valley had ever noticed before. Chapter 3. A Funny Old Monkey. Pearl's father called his book arcade the Palace of Intellect. The rest of Melbourne sometimes called him Old King Cole. Ma's favourite spot in the shop was called Queen's Corner, where she liked to keep an eye on things, which really meant having tea and plotting marriages between the staff. So if Pa was the king and Ma was the queen, that made Linda the princess, Eddie the prince, and Valley the duke. Pearl didn't want to be a duchess, though a duchess sounded poncy and a bit useless. She preferred to think of herself as Marchioness, which was the next rank down. She didn't really know what a Marchioness did, but she really liked the idea of marching around with pet lionesses and didn't want to be corrected. Anyway, Ruby was born before Pearl, so she have been the Duchess. But being a Ponzi Duchess was better than not being a Cole. If her pa had not been so clever as a young man, he might have been kept searching goldfields for his fortune forever. Instead, he had noticed that it was in the prospectors making their fortune, but the shopkeepers, the miners had needed something to drink, but beer made them violent, and river water made them violently sick. So he started Cole's cordials and painted his sign on the back of a frying pan. If he had not been so hopeful and bright, he might have stayed on the lemonade cart amid the noise and dirt of the goldfields. Instead, he had believed in something better, so working as a field botanist and photographer, he had rowed down the Murray and round the coast to Melbourne. His seeds had been accepted by the director of the Botanic Gardens, Sir Ferdinand Jacob Heinrich von Wöhler. When that money ran out, he'd sold pies in the Wild Carnival Paddy's Market. If he had not been so curious, he might never have spent time in Melbourne's libraries. If he hadn't spent time in the libraries, he might never have written his first pamphlet, which he sold with his pies. If he hadn't done that, he might never have met the customer who'd sold him the shelf of old books. And if he hadn't done that, he never could have turned his pie stand into his first bookshop. If he had not been a man of so many wonderful qualities, Ma might have decided not to marry him. She might have stopped writing him letters and travelled back to Tasmania. And then Ma would have been unhappy, and Pa would have been all alone, and Pearl Adelia Cole would have been born Pearl Adelia Shufflebottom. But Pa was clever and hopeful and brave. He had done all of those things. He made shiny bronze tokens with messages of wisdom on them and scattered them around the street for people to spend at his arcade. Best of all, he was kind. His funny picture book did have a picture of Cole's patent whipping machine for flogging naughty children, but that was just a joke. He had only ever hurt a child by accident. The time Eddie launched a springy toy snake near a horse in the street, and Pa had yanked him out of the way as the terrified animal bolted. He stood up for the racial dress movement, those sensible ladies who wore baggy trousers to ride bicycles and play tennis. He denounced prejudice of all kinds. The people everywhere in the world whom you do not know are just as good as those you do. His medallions read, and to prove to the world that it was true, the arcade had a rainbow staff to match its rainbow sign. The jeweler was Indian. The tea salon staff were Chinese, and Mr. Gabriel, head of non-fiction inquiries, was a Mauritian with vitiligo. Pearl liked the words Mauritian, vitiligo very much, even if she wasn't sure how to pronounce them, like me. So the Cole children woke up every morning in a beautiful bookshop full with monkeys and music, perfume, and China toys and sweets, magic and rainbows. The city was on their doorstep, all the clanging trams shouting, pushcart vendors, and buskers playing their hearts out. The Coles didn't even have to go to school. Ma and Pa disagreed with the methods of discipline. Linda, Eddie, and Val chose to go. Melbourne's grammar schools had team sports and choirs and other teenagers, which outweighed the teachers' canes and the frequent boredom. Pearl and Ivy preferred to be schooled at home, where their parents and tutors encouraged them to study what interested them most. The Coles had dessert every day. Sometimes it was crisp apples. Other days it might have been luscious peaches always. there was a game. I can put a hole through your hand and it won't hurt a bit. Ma might say the trick was to roll up a piece of paper like a telescope, look through it with your left eye, and hold your right eye hand in front of your right eye, so the hole and your hand lined up as one image. Other times, when dinner was cleared away, Pa would announce the perfect thing to finish off that lovely meal is a bit of smelly cheese. He'd pat his pockets, feign horror, and shout, "By heavens, I've lost it!" Everybody would run around the flat, pretending to search for the cheese. Instead, they would find a bag of lollies behind the couch cushions or strawberries hiding under the lid of the piano, as long as Ebenezer, Valley's slobbery mastiff, didn't find them first. But on Tuesday night, there was no smelly cheese game. Instead, Pa claimed that if anyone climbed up onto the table, he would bring them down upon a feather. Eddie leaned back in his chair. You can't make a person float down from the table on a feather. Bet you a shilling. I've told you what I think of gambling, Eddie, said Pa, and I'm a man of my word. I'll bring whoever stands on the table down on a feather. It takes career magicians age to work up to making a person fly. Years of practice. Eddie took a bite from his nectarine. There's an American bloke who says he'll give $1,000 to anyone who can stay more than 6 inches off the ground for 30 seconds. No one has done it yet. And if they think about anything other than flying while they do it, boom, said Valley. They hit the deck. What's the point of flying if you can't enjoy the view? Go on, Ma, cried Ivy. Let's see him bring you down on a feather. Elizabeth couldn't speak for snorting with laughter. A lady of a comfortable proportions drifting through the air would be a sight indeed. Down on a feather, said Linda thoughtfully. You never said fly, did you, Pa? I still don't see anybody on the table, Pa said. So Pearl kicked off her shoes and climbed up into the middle of the table. 2 cheers from her sisters. She didn't know what to expect. It could be magic, or it could be a trick. There was no way of telling with Pa, or indeed the arcade. A coin appeared from behind her ear was a trick. The bookshop's tendency to roll a ladder down you when you needed one was magic. But when she asked, Pa always said the coin was magic and the ladders were nothing but smoke and mirrors. Pa wasn't as gullible as Ivy, but she wasn't as skeptical as Ed, who had the imagination of a beetle, and she couldn't help feeling the tiniest bit nervous as Pa took a long white feather from his pocket and began to wave it about. Would he lift her down, with her toe touching the feather, or would he have to shrink her to fit on it? What would he imagine? What would he say to make it come true? By all the powers of wind and weather, he chanted, I bring this child down on a feather. And laying it in her hands, he pointed to the base of the feather, where the fibers were soft and fluffy. There you are, Pearl. That's the down. Linda, Eddie, and Valley groaned as one. Bring me down on a feather instead, Pearl said, and jumped on him. This is not clever of her. He was a wonderful Pa in every way, but at 60 he was not a young one, as he began to buckle under her weight. There was a knock at the front door. Ebenezer barked shockingly loud. Pearl fell on her bottom on the carpet. Skirts up, frilly combination suit on show. She wasn't hurt. In fact, she began to laugh, but her father looked alarmed. Pa? Linda stood up from the table. Are you all right? Yes. He glanced at the door, then at Ma. Sorry, dear. I'd better go and see. The laughter was dead by the time he left the room. Valley struggled to hold Ebenezer's collar. Down, Nisa. Shush. The dog strained towards the door, growling. Evening, Cole heard a voice from the front door. Not disturbing you, I hope. Who's that? Linda whispered, but the others looked mystified. Pearl could see them trying to puzzle it out. The arcade was open until 10 o'clock, but the staff always called Pa, Sir. Friends and relatives usually telephoned first. Ma wasn't holding any concerts or seances until next month. Pearl knew that voice, though it belonged to the strange man, the one who called himself the Obscure Smith, the one whose paper bird had been watching her. You said you'd leave the others alone, said Pa under his breath. If you can't keep your word, I don't want anything from you. And I'm well, thank you, said the Obscure Smith airily. I thought you'd be pleased to hear my news. Cole, Ma said. She never called her husband Edward. Aren't you going to invite our visitor in, darling? Don't, said Pearl before she could stop herself. Pearl, Linda began, aghast, but Valley hushed her. Tremendous success, the Obscure Smith was saying. But have I come at a bad time? Oh, not at all, Pa said. That's excellent. He ducked his head back into the dining room. A peculiar spark was dancing in his eyes. Just popping down to the office, dear. Won't be long. And whisking his top hat off the polar bear that served as the family coat rack. He followed the stranger outside in the baffled silence. Eddie dropped his nectarine pit in the empty fruit bowl. What's he up to this time? They all mused on their father's history of peculiar stunts. The flying machine contest, the incident with the soap mountain, the city-wide scramble to find Cole's pot of gold and win the free books. Valley ruffled Ebenezer's fur. I don't think we'd guess in a million years. Pearl worried about her father until bedtime, when he came to say good night to her and Ivy, though Mr. Cole seemed pleased with himself. Pearl looked up from the pages of Captain January. Who is that man? Her father hesitated a while. He used to work near my stall at Paddy's Market. He sells things you can't get anywhere else. What sorts of things? Pa smiled in a way that made Pearl unsure whether or not he was spinning a yarn. A beautiful singing voice. A look into the future. But it might cost you 3 of your teeth or a day's good luck. And he doesn't care if you come off worse. Pearl's spine prickled. What does he need teeth for? Just how he works his magic, I suppose. Some people find conviction comes more easily when they concentrate on an object or a group of objects. It was plausible. Linda, for one, used small objects for her sorcery, mending broken eggshells, commanding silk handkerchiefs to tie themselves in knots. But Pearl didn't quite believe that the Obscure Smith bothered with party tricks like that. He sounds like a swindler, said Ivy in her gap-toothed lisp. Oh, what, my darling? A swindler. Ivy bounced onto her knees. Like in the Emperor's New Clothes. Even I couldn't get away with strutting around Melbourne in my birthday suit. Pa sank down on the foot of the girl's bed. Not there, Ivy cried. A fleeting sorrow crossed their father's face. A pang of jealousy shot through Pearl's chest. Ivy had been 4 years old in 1890. She must have known Ruby wasn't coming back. But a week after the awful day, Pearl had come into the playroom to find Ivy conversing with nobody. Was it a ghost? Could they talk to it? Perhaps at one of Ma's seances. No, Ivy had said. Ruby wasn't a ghost. She was imaginary. She was Ivy's imaginary friend. Pearl had wanted so badly, still did, to be in on the game. It wasn't fair that only I was allowed to see Ruby, speak to her, play with her, but it was like trying to conjure by copying someone else's style. It was Ivy's special knack, and Pearl didn't have it. Imaginary Ruby was naughtier than the real one, and not as clever. Whenever Ivy was accused of sneaking biscuits or breaking a plate, imaginary Ruby took the blame. It was an angry Linda, 13 then, who had put imaginary Ruby in chains. Seeing Ivy chatter happily to thin air made their parents blink a lot and announced that it was a bad time of year for hay fever. From then on, Ivy had never asked anyone to set an extra plate at the table, nor did she speak to anyone who wasn't there. When in the company of someone who was. But sometimes in the girls' bedroom or the playroom, or when she thought no one was paying attention, she still made space for her imaginary sister. Tonight, Pa didn't question it. He rose and made it to sit down on Linda's bed aside them. Here, said Ivy, patting a spot that was nearer to the head of the bed. Good. The cheer in his voice sounded almost genuine this time. Pearl went back to her book. Now, shall I read or tell? Tell, please. Ivy snuggled close to his body. Once upon a time, said Pa, taking a deep breath, there was a funny old monkey who had 6 young monkeys. There was 1 white monkey and 1 black monkey and 1 yellow monkey and 1 red monkey and 1 blue monkey and 1 green monkey. Pearl had outgrown Pa's monkey stories, but she couldn't help listening. The cadence of his voice with its occasional Kentish sparkle was a sound of home. She liked the way he always left the red monkey in. One day, all the monkeys were leaping and swinging through the jungle when the red monkey slipped and fell through the canopy, and though they searched and searched, the other monkeys couldn't see her, and it seemed that she was lost forever. Ivy's brow furrowed. Pa, I changed my mind. But that's not the end of it. You see, by the old monkey met a little bird, and the bird said he might be able to help with their problem of the missing red monkey. And the old monkey said that would be very kind of him. So the bird flew off, over the rivers and under the thorns, and do you know what he found? The red monkey? Asked Ivy. Pa had never told this version before. The bird was new. He did! And she was quite as lively and bright as she had been the day that she had tumbled down through the canopy. In that tangled jungle, she hadn't been able to find her way back home. Pa stopped, and Pearl was afraid that he might be upset again until he raised his fist to his mouth to cough. It was deep and hoarse, which was unusual to hear from Pa because he didn't smoke. Pearl looked up at him. All right, Pa? He patted his chest hard and cleared his throat. Losing my voice. It must be from yelling at you rotten kids all day. The idea of Pa yelling at them for being rotten or yelling at all was so silly that Pearl and Ivy had to giggle in the next room. One of the boys did the same. So, said Pa, the little bird led the red monkey back to her family, and they were all very happy and ate bananas. Grapes? Said Ivy. Grapes didn't grow in the jungle, of course, but the arcade monkeys liked grapes better than anything. They ate grapes in the treetops together, Pa said. What did you think of that, Miss Ivy Diamond? That was a good one, Ivy said, sounding squashed as Pa hugged her. Pearl was still thinking of the red monkey and the bird. The cold children accompanied Ma to church when they felt like it, but they were allowed to choose any religion they liked. Linda was interested in all sorts of mythologies and claimed to follow a different religion every time you asked her. Valley was an atheist and didn't keep it a secret. Paul was agnostic, fascinated by the similar goals and messages of different religions, and the people that followed them. Pearl wasn't sure of her own religions, but she liked Paul's ways of looking at it. Let the world be your country, and to do good be your religion. Is the bird supposed to be God? A smile tugged the corner of his mustache. If you like. Is heaven real? Asked Ivy. Will we see Ruby there? Which heaven do you think she'd like? Pa said. Definitely not the Asphodel Meadows. Pearl had read a little of ancient Greek myths. A field of full, mindless shadows were not her idea of pleasant afterlife. Pa chuckled. No? One of the paradises Ruby had loved the botanic gardens up on the St. Kilda Road. If heaven's in the sky, Ivy said, how come we can't see it from a hot air balloon? Your mother probably knows more about that than I do. If you ask me, heaven is any place where you're happy. Their father stood up a bit stiffly and turned down the gas lamp until the flame was out. You're happy here, aren't you, my little monkeys? No, said Ivy with a wink. She had just learned how to wink last week. Pa winked back. Bad luck. And Pearl said that she was happy too. But after Pa closed the door, she lay awake for a long time, try as she might to imagine happy rainbow monkeys. Her mind kept caging them in a stall in Paddy's market. Their shrieks added to the chaos of the fortune tellers and poultry sellers, the buskers and beggars, while a tall man sidled through the crowds, trading wishes for teeth. Chapter 4. Pearl and Ruby. The grandest bookshop in the world. Part 2. Author Amelia Meller. Eddie wasn't even looking at it. His eyes were only on Maylin in her tight gold capal. Eddie had changed a lot recently. He was the same height now as their big sister. The boyish roundness had left his face, giving definition to an angular jaw, which he was now shaving every second day. Valley didn't think he'd ever have Eddie's confident good looks. He had his father's oval face, the kind that managed to look childlike, even with a luxuriant beard. Well, anyway, I was getting to the good bit, said Valley, trying to salvage the conversation they'd just been having. The master calls the marks, and we get our tests back. And as we're leaving, Henry Bramford goes, another A+ for Val Collin. Got to study hard to be like his crackpot dad. So I turn around and I go, don't worry, Henry, you can always work on the family farm. And he shoves me and says, because all farmers are stupid, are they? And I go, no, because you're a donkey. The kitchen saloon doors swung with Maylin passing. Eddie turned abruptly back to face his brother.